Good afternoon, namaskar, sat sri akal, and adabars to all the people who have spared time to join this webinar, which is being hosted by ASA today. I have 5 minutes, so I'll quickly try and first do the formalities, and then I will tell you a little bit about the webinars. So we have two speakers today. I will introduce the speakers shortly. The participants right now are on only listen mode, listen only mode, and there is a chat session for any questions that you may have. You can post it there. At the end of the session, we will have a Q&A where we will try and take up as many of those questions as possible. Sandeep Gupta is the first speaker, and Subroto Bose is the second speaker for today. They are both partners in ASA, and my dear partners have worked very, very hard to prepare for this, session today. Interestingly, I must tell you something about what ASA has been doing about these webinars, and which is the interesting part of this whole thing. Everybody during this COVID period has been, extensively doing webinars, discussions, fireside chats. A lot of things has been done. But interestingly, what we have tried to do is do something more specific rather than, just doing webinars for the sake of it. These are not for the sake of it. Our webinars have been directed towards a specific audience to not only try and address a point of view, but to address the pain points. There is so much happened in the last 3 months or last 4 months that it's very difficult to keep a track of what's happening, what is changing, what was earlier, what's now, whether we are doing it correctly, whether we are doing it wrong, what are the typical issues that emerge, even when the laws change, when the regulations change. The regulators are trying to help the businesses, make it simpler for them. But in the bargain, while some things get simplified, the others become pain points. So the SSE, the people who are helping them, the advisors, everybody has some kind of questions that keep coming into their minds, to be able to address them, to be able to get to it, to get to the bottom of it and try to address those. So our webinars have actually been directed towards trying, if I may put across very, very simply, to address the pain points of businesses, pain points of our clients, pain points of the regulatory authority, pain points of the business community, both domestic as well as the international business community. We have been doing these webinars not only with our clients, with the businesses, but we've also done quite a few of these with the international community, because the world is shrinking. Today India is pretty much a part of the global business scenario. And we did one with the law firm in UK. We did another one with another accounting firm in the US. We have another one coming up next week. And if you see the essence of all these discussions, they are really how the businesses of that country or of that community are being impacted by the various changes that have come in because of the times, the regulations, everything that has changed over the last 3 months. So I will not talk more about that, because what is more important in this discussion today is that we reach out to you with the topic, which is the significant regulatory issues or updates that have happened over the last few months. In fact, we've done this before, but from that point till now, there's so much that has happened again that we are clearly ready with another one to give you an update. So quickly about the speakers, Sandeep is a partner with our accounting and business support services, and he really leads the indirect tax initiative of our firm. And Subroto also a partner in the firm with the ABS, which is the Accounting and Business Support Services, who leads the initiative in our Delhi office. So they are going to give you various aspects about the regulatory things, and quickly repeating, Q&A will be at the end. We are happy to answer most of your questions. In case we cannot answer your questions, if we may run out of time, you are more than welcome to write to us, and we'll be happy to address them on a one-on-one basis, because I repeat, the idea is to address the pain points, and if you should have any, please come back to us. So let me just quickly take you to Sandeep. Sandeep, would you please take over from here?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rajiv. Somebody's changing the slides, right? We can move to the next slide. Yeah, okay. So thanks, Rajiv. Thank you all the participants who have joined this webinar, taking time this out in your midweek afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. As Rajiv has said, the purpose of this webinar is basically to update you and refresh you with the various regulatory changes which have been happening in the past quarter, the April to June. A few changes coming in July also. We try to make this more of a capsule kind of a webinar in terms of just touching upon the broad topics, the significant changes which we feel that people should be aware about, people should need to refresh, and maybe we talk about a few impacts of those significant changes also. Why I say it's a capsule is because normally you would have seen in the webinar that it's either on indirect taxes or direct taxes or taxation in general, but it's more like topical. What we have tried to give you today is like a summary of various regulatory changes on the tax side, which is direct and indirect tax both. We will also give you a capsule summary of the changes on the accounting and the reporting part, which has gained significant amount of traction due to COVID. There are enough and more concerns which are happening. We will also give you summary updates on various corporate laws, on labor laws, on FEMA laws, and the things like that which are going to impact all of us as finance professionals. So first, I would like to take the indirect tax section and the direct tax section, and then I will request my colleague Subroto to take over the rest of the sections on accounting and reporting, corporate laws, and labor laws. Next slide, please. Yeah, the next slide. So on the indirect tax, there have been, various changes which have been happening. Quite a few of them were prompted because of the COVID scenario. Government gave a lot of relaxations due to the difficulties faced by the taxpayers due to the virus lockdowns. The whole country was under lockdown. The global scenario was more or less under lockdown for quite some time, and that entire thing affected lots of trade and the economy measures. Not to just talk about the Indian environment where the movement of goods was not happening because of the lockdown. Even cross-border transactions are not happening. Flights were stopped and things like that. But other than the COVID-related changes, there have been certain other changes also which were implemented by the government for bringing ease of compliances, which were on the anvil. So I'm getting an echo from somebody. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So the government was always contemplating those changes. The council had already passed those changes, but probably it was the timing that the implementation of those changes fell into the COVID domain. So we would essentially be covering the changes effective April onwards till as latest as maybe yesterday. We'll try to cover that. Maybe something is not in the presentation, but we can always talk about it over the Q&A session. So first and foremost, on the relaxation and the due dates, which was a very welcome thing the government did, they extended or relaxed the due dates of filing of GSTR 1 and 3Bs, you would know. So right from the months of February onwards till now, they have come out with various staggered dates. But the interesting part to note here is that while the government has given full relaxation of interest in terms of the relaxed date of filing to taxpayers less than 5 crore category, but for the taxpayers falling under the higher threshold of more than 5 crore of aggregate turnover in a year, they are being given a relaxation of interest. They have not been completely waived off. So under the new notifications, if you are filing your GSTR 3Bs by the relaxed date, you will be paying interest up to 9% instead of the normal 18%. But if you even defer that particular date, which is the relaxed date, then the normal interest will apply. But care is to be taken that the interest calculation will start from the end of the relaxed date, and that's how the things are happening. On the late fees, the government said that we would be waiving off the late fees for the up to the relaxed date of filing, so that was a welcome measure. These aspects you would already know, but just to refresh, some of the periods for relaxed dates of filing are already over. Some of them are now going to fall due, and that should be the concern, that the compliances should not lapse. The interesting part was for the GST audits under the CGST Act. They relaxed the due date for 2018-19 only as of now. So earlier it was March, and then they extended to September now. Now we are almost at the end of July, so another 2 months, and the GSTR 9 and the 9Cs will have to be filed. There could be a potential extension here also from now also, because situation is still not very good in terms of most of the corporates, but we'll have to see what is the new date of extension, if at all. Otherwise, please prepare yourself for completion and filing of the audit by 30th of September. There was an extension on the e-way bills, which was a practical measure. So the government said that anything which was generated up to the March 24th and expiring anytime after March 20th, those would be valid till 30th of June. Obviously, the date has gone by, but as of now, the past situation was handled by the government in this basis. There was also an ordinance by virtue of which there was a general extension for all appeals, proceedings, various kind of notices, issue of notices, filing of responses to notices, and all that has been extended up to 31st of August. Care is that the compliances should have been falling due between March 20 to August 29. Another extension which the government gave was on the amnesty scheme, which came in last year, the Sabka Vishwas Legacy Dispute Resolution Scheme. So now the date of last payment under the scheme has been extended, was extended up to 30th of June. In terms of relief measures, the government capped the late fee, not only for the current year's returns, but also for the returns since the inception of GST, which is July of 2017. So as of now, the situation which stands is there will be a maximum late fee of 500, 250 under the CGST Act and 250 under the SGST Act. Another interesting part the government said is that for all these months, if your tax liability has been nil in any particular month and you have delayed the filing of the return, then there will be no late fee. So now late fees has been linked to the liability of payment of tax also, which is a very welcome move. To help the assessees with the cash flows, the reconciliation for taking of credit, which means your ITC ledger and the GSTR 2A, the government said you can continue to take the credit under the GST laws based on your ITC ledger, even if it is not appearing in GSTR 2A for the months from February to August 2020. No need to do a reconciliation, gives a cash flow relaxation and support to the business houses. But the government said for all these months, you need to do an end-to-end reconciliation in the month of September while filing the September return and adjust your tax liability thereon. So be very careful. It's not like a blanket deferment of tax liability. It's not a blanket deferment of your reconciliation responsibility, because the law was amended and very clearly anything not appearing in 2A will not be allowed as a credit to you anymore. The audit threshold of GST was increased from 2 crores to 5 crores. Now this is a very interesting aspect here. As per the amendment made in the rules, I think it is Rule 88 sub Rule 3, the proviso was added where they said this threshold has been increased from 2 crores to 5 crores for financial year 2018-19 only. So as of now, what the situation stands is that for 18-19 financial year, the threshold is 5 crore, but for 19-20, what will it be? It, as per the current provisions, will resort back to 2 crores unless the amendment comes in future. So that's what we need to wait out and see how the government comes up. In terms of ease of compliances, various measures were taken in terms of permitting filing of GSTR 1 and 3Bs for through EVC, electronic verification code. SMS filing has been permitted for nil returns. The e-invoicing, the very interesting concept that was deferred from April 1 to October 1, and very recently, just a couple of days back, last Friday, Mr. Yogendra Garg, Principal Commissioner in the policy wing, announced that while the notification is not there, he actually let the cat out of the bag. He said, now we will be implementing e-invoicing from October 1, all right, there will be no deferment, but it will not apply to taxpayers of having in the aggregate turnover threshold category of 100 crores, but it will apply to 500 crores and above category. So that's a very welcome move, but how will this work out would depend obviously on the notification as and when it is released by the government. Government also said that there would be an inter-head transfer permitted between the cash ledger balance from free CGST to SGST, which was a long pending demand, and now actually helps not only in the cash flows but to avoid all those proceedings of going in for an unnecessary refund. Tax credit transfers between multiple places of business, that has also been enabled on the GSTN portal. So overall, quite a bit of work which was done in these past 3 months. Next slide, please. On the refunds, yes, there has been certain grim scenarios and certain welcome moves. The government gave a 90% provisional refund in most of the cases to help with the liquidity, but they also came out with a new notification which changed the conditions of refund. So critical one of them was that if anything is not appearing in 2A, you will not be getting a credit of it. It also gave a relaxation in the sense of bunching up tax periods across different financial years, which means from 1920, let's say the January to March 20 can be clubbed with April to June 20, and 6 months total refund can be clubbed at one stage. This actually helps the exporters in many ways, which we have discussed in the earlier seminars. The government also came out with a benefit that if goods are, due to the COVID scenario, if your contracts are cancelled, then instead of adjusting it against a tax liability which could be non-existing because the no sales are happening, the government said you are entitled to claim a refund also. A very welcome move in that. But the difficult things which the government did was that now with every refund application, a line item wise HSN and SAC code has to be given for all that tax credit for which you are claiming a refund. Very cumbersome task. And they also came out as like a very fine print. They came out that in case of exports, your turnover of export of goods will be valued on the basis of 1.5 times of value of similar goods sold in the domestic market. What was the reason for it is very simple. People were using over invoicing and getting more refunds out of this when they had a DTA sale as well as an export sale. Probably to curb that, but very difficult to implement and very, very difficult to justify also what is the value of similar goods. An interesting thing which happened in one of the advance rulings was that the taxability of directors' remuneration was challenged, and the authority for advance ruling said we will make it taxable. Fortunately, the government acted very, very proactively on it and came out with a clarificatory clarification saying that if the salary of the director is taxed under the TDS rules of Income Tax Act, which is a 192, then it would be outside the purview of GST. It will fall under Schedule 3 of the CGST Act. It will not be a supply. But they also said in that circular that everything will have to be determined on a case-to-case basis. So there could potentially be a situation where there is an executive director, a working director, who would be getting a fixed salary taxed under the income tax laws, and who would also be getting remuneration in the form of services which are taxable under GST. So care should be taken in terms of compensations which are being given to the directors as of now. Couple of advance rulings which we want to discuss here would be the ex-factory sales, which came in very recently. I mean, it settles a position of law to some extent, but also creates a Pandora's box, I would say, for certain on the counter sales. Now, what they said that even if the terms of sale are ex-factory, which means the seller's rights transfer on to the buyer as soon as the goods are delivered to the buyer outside the factory gate and the buyer takes possession of it, the taxability will be dependent on whether the buyer is required to transport these goods to another state or not. So the advance ruling has held that if the buyer takes these goods to his factory, which is situated in another state, the delivery to the buyer will not be complete till it reaches that factory of his in another state, which means the taxable position changes. Instead of applying it as an intrastate tax, which is CGST and SGST, now IGST would apply. Now the complication which this has thrown up is that if I go to let's say a Croma store in Gurgaon, I live in Delhi, I come to Gurgaon, go to a Croma store, buy a laptop, and I give him my address and my GSTN number of Delhi, what tax would Croma be levying? Till now, what they were doing, they were levying it because they have handed it across the counter to you on the shop floor. They were charging CGST and SGST. Now, by virtue of this ruling, obviously the rulings are not legal jurisprudence. It only applies to the person. But the tax officers in the different states could become very adventurous by virtue of these rulings, as we have seen in the past. What will happen? Let's wait and watch out for, but something to be very careful when you are entering into these kind of transactions. Another interesting ruling which came up was on the salary of the expatriates. So in the case of Hitachi, it was actually the case, and they said that the foreign expatriates which are deputed to the project office in India, they also attain an employer-employee relationship vis-a-vis the project office in India, even though they continue to be employees of the parent company in outside. In this particular case, it was Germany. They said because of this extension of the employer-employee relationship of the deputed employee into India in the project office, the compensation paid to the head office in lieu of these salaries would not be considered a GST supply, would be outside the purview of Section 7 and would be treated under the exception non-supply cases of Schedule 3. Very welcome ruling, settles quite a bit of controversy in this regard. But again, as I said, these advance rulings do not have a legal jurisprudence. So if anybody goes into court on this, it would be the final word of the legal courts which will decide this issue. The most difficult ruling, which is the last one, which I would like to discuss with you, is on the intermediary services. Now, what this has said, in the case of services which are being provided to a foreign entity, the intermediary sits in India, the recipient is outside India, but because he's providing a service, by virtue of Section 7 of the IGST Act, this would be treated as an interstate supply and not an intrastate supply. You would say it is as per the provision of law, very fine, accepted. But the difficulty, sir, which will come here is that when you are putting this in GSTR 1, the portal does not allow you to display IGST the moment the place of supply remains in the same state as the state of the supplier. Now, as per Section 13, the place of supply rules very clearly determine that in case of intermediary services, the cost will fall on the address of the registered address of the supplier. So there is a disconnect between the statute and the way GSTN has been implemented. So this is probably going to be a very difficult situation when we actually talk about implementing it on the grassroots level. Next slide, please. In terms, just a quick one on the customs, because I think we'll be running out of time for the next session. So customs also, quite a bit of amendments were made, but the significant one which has come in is the customs department geared up for the complete paperless movement of the goods, paperless clearance of the goods, the imported goods. That was a very welcome move. The PDF copies of the bill of entries along with the out of charge copy would be transmitted between the various officers, and based on that, the goods would be permitted to be cleared. But there would be no requirement of submitting detailed bundles of document in physical copy in these such cases. Prioritized clearance has been happening, especially for the COVID-related material. but that's obviously expected. The country and the whole world is gearing up for it, and India also did the same. Provisional clearance of goods under the various trade agreements, the preferential trade agreements. The relaxation was done that the original certificate of origin will not be insisted upon for a certain time. A declaration will suffice, and once that period was over, then the certificate of origin could be given to them. In terms of FTP, broadly what they have done is that they have extended the whole FTP, which was expiring on 31st March 2020, by a year. So now it will apply to 2021, barring certain exceptions which will expire either in September or December of 2020. Similarly, for the MEIS and SEIS scripts, the due dates were extended, the late cuts were relaxed, and giving benefit to these people to be able to file their applications for getting SEIS or MEIS scripts, because they could not do so and submit the necessary paperwork due to the lockdown. Next slide, please. We will now move on to the direct tax amendments very quickly. So broadly what we will talk about, next slide please. In terms of the dates of filing, the government came out very proactively this time, I would say, that the due dates for filing of your returns, which were July and November, they have extended it now to all of them to November. So the salary returns of July gets deferred till 30th of November. The tax audit returns without TP transfer pricing involved from September gets deferred to July to November, and similarly all other the compliances linked with filing of the return, they have also been deferred. This is as per the chart. I will not go too deep into it, but the interesting part to know is the last two lines, that the assessment time barring dates have also been extended by the government from September 2020 to December 2020, and those cases becoming time bar in March 31, 2021 will get deferred to September 30, 2021. Very proactive approach. Next slide, please. In terms of the, again, that ordinance, so the general extension was given for all the compliances falling due during the particular time. They were extended till 31st December. They were now further extended up to 31st of March 2021. And this is again applies to filing of appeals, issue of notices, filing response to notices, orders, and everything. The 269 SU, which was a new section promulgated this year, which said that people who are doing electronic transactions, people who are receiving money need to provide the specified modes of receipt of remittances, which were electronic remittances. This has been a relaxation has been given to the taxpayer, that if you are only having B2B transactions and 95% of your receipts are other than cash, then you do not need to provide the facility, the specified facility under RuPay debit card or Beam UPI or the QR code to enable a person to remit money to you. And then there were interest rate relaxations. They were reduced to 9% from 12. And interestingly, the form 26AS, which we use even now to calculate how much of tax has been deducted. This is like the GSTR 2A concept. Now 26AS is going to provide much more information to you, including if you have bought a property. It will include the kind of your purchases, heavy duty purchases. There are certain monetary thresholds. I will not go into it due to lack of time, but various information will now be populated by the income tax department, collected through various sources into your 26AS. Now because of this, your 26AS will become a very critical document, not only to the tax officers, but also to bankers, to your creditors, to anybody who needs to assess what kind of transactions you enter into. So all that disclosure will now be provided, and 26AS will become one of the key documents being sought by various people. Next slide, please. And then coming on to the last part, the TDS and TCS returns for the last quarter of 2019-20. The date has been extended to 31st of July, and consequently the issue of TDS certificates also will now need to be done by 15th of August. So be careful that these deadlines are very close around the corner. Don't skip them on it. And interestingly, for the financial year 2021, they gave a relaxation on the TDS rates prescribed under the Act. So the contractual TDS of 2% or 1% or professional TDS of 10%, all the rates specified under the specific section get reduced to 75% of the original rate. So a 10% rate will become 7.5%. A 2% rate also gets reduced by a 0.25% and things like those. And they also gave a relaxation in terms of the interest on delay in deposit of TDS, which was essentially a liquidity providing measure by the government. The rate was reduced from 18 to 9%. So friends, this is what I wanted to share with you in terms of a capsule summary of the amendments during this quarter until maybe yesterday in July. And if you have any questions on these, we'll be very happy to take them during the Q&A session. Now I would like Subroto to take over and discuss with you the key changes in terms of accounting and reporting, very significant, and corporate laws and labor laws. Over to you, Subroto. Next slide.
Yeah. So so let's cover the accounting and reporting part for the day. As you know that CARO 2020 is applicable from FY 2021. So for the audits that happen for this year, in the next year, the company's auditor report order has to be will be mandatory. Now what I'll speak in this particular slide is that what are the key areas that is a change from the CARO 2016, right? One of the major changes that we have here is the evergreening of the loans. Now, what is an evergreening of the loan? It is basically if a loan and advance is due in the current year and it is either extended or renewed, or the same party is given an additional loan to repay the old loan. This is what is called evergreening of the loan. So this is a new feature, a clause which has been incorporated in CARO 2020, which is of great significance. Apart from this, there is one more clause that needs detailing here, is the fact that the internal audit report, which is with the statutory auditor, because as you know, the auditor relies on the work of the other auditor. So internal audit report has to be considered by the stat auditor, and he must say in his observations as to how he has dealt with in this in his report of audit, the internal auditor's report as well. So these are the two things that is very important. Apart from this, another important clause that has come up here is the if a company has taken a working capital loan of exceeding rupees 5 crores, right? In that particular case, the company has to submit, and this loan is can be from the banks or financial institutions. Now, the company has to submit to the bank and financial institution a statement, a return, so to say, at periodic intervals. Now, the auditor must go through those statements and then report on it. So basically, this point in the CARO, this has a prospective effect. Now, how this will be handled by the auditor is a matter which has to be looked into. But as preparers of financial statements, we have to be aware of this point as well. This is one of the major points. Now, another shift from the CARO is that fixed assets no more is mentioned in the CARO 2020 report. It is property, plant, and equipment. Now, the requirement is the same as the fixed assets, but herein you have to talk about property, plant, and equipment. You have to talk about revaluation of the property, plant, and equipment, and if any major changes happen due to revaluation, that has to be explained by the auditor also in his statement. Another important factor in the CARO 2020 is a report on the title deeds to immovable property. That's very important. The title deeds of immovable property which are appearing in the financial statements, whether these are in the name of the company, that has to be reported by the auditor also. And last but not the least, the auditor also has to speak about the whether the company is able to meet its liabilities 1 year from the balance sheet date, given the fact that the auditor has to study check the cash orders, the order book of the company, the financial statements, the financial ratios, talk to the management, but he must give his observation whether he thinks that the company is able to meet its liabilities going forward, at least for the next year. So these are the few 4 or 5 changes that we see that has come in the Caro 2020, which is very important and one should be aware of. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, another very important part which I wanted to take up in the accounting and reporting section is as a preparer of financial statements, when you are preparing financial statements for the auditors, you have to keep certain things in mind, especially in this year, which is a COVID year. What are the major things that you need to keep in mind? First, to my mind, is inventory. So we all know that inventory is either disclosed as per net realizable value or cost, whichever is less. Now, in the COVID scenario, the net realizable value can be lower than the cost. So inventories have to be written down. This particular aspect has to be taken care of by each and every accountant of the company as to what should be the valuation of the inventory in this particular case. That is very, very important. I am talking now for not only the last few days of the last year, but especially this year, because the COVID started, basically the lockdown started March 24th onwards, but it's continuing still in many areas. It went on for 3 months. So this year is very important that how you present the financial statements before the auditors. The inventory must be one of those items which you should be extremely careful of the valuation. The trade receivables, that you have, everybody knows in the COVID scenario, this is a liquidity issue that's happening with every person. Every company is facing liquidity crisis. In this scenario, you have to be careful to classify or not. I would rather use the word to classify or not some of those aspects, some of those trade receivables which you feel can be bad or can be doubtful. You need to then make suitable provision for the same. Again, with regard to revenue recognition, of course, that's one of the major items that you need to look at. The customers may want discounts, the customers may return your goods. How do you account for those in your financial statements? That is what is very important. So the revenue recognition policy of the company, as per the accounting standard, has to be carefully monitored, has to be carefully controlled by the preparer of the financial statement. And these points are only not from an auditing perspective. These points are from the perspective of a person who is preparing the financial statement of the company for the purpose of audit. Similarly, for impairment of assets, the assets are lying, not being used for a long period of time in this year. Therefore, whether impairment testing needs to be done, which was probably not the plan, and whether the impairment testing will show a huge difference, a good amount of delta, which needs to be reflected in the financial statement. That's also very important. Similarly, last but not the least, going concern assumption. Because of the COVID, the impact of the COVID has to be seen whether the company is able to stay afloat because of the loss of business or so-called reduction of business for the company. So these areas are especially important for an accountant while preparing the financial statements. Next slide, please. I quickly shift to the corporate laws and labor laws. So first, the corporate laws. Next slide. So what are the changes in the Companies Act? A few of the changes that has happened is that time interval between two board meetings have now been extended from 120 days to 180 days. We all know that, and this is for the first 2 quarters. It is applicable till September 30, 2020. So this is a COVID related relaxation that we all know the law says that 120 days should be the maximum gap between two board meetings. Now they have said that no, that gap can be up to 180 days, but that is for only the 2 quarters, that is April to June and July to September. Till September 30, this is applicable. This may be extended, nobody knows, but depends on how the lockdown situation comes in. But yes, we have nothing as of now to say more on this. As regards commencement of business, as you know, every company has to get a commencement of business certificate, right? A public, a private, every company. Now, this commencement of business certificate was to be obtained within 6 months from the date of incorporation. Right now, this period has been extended for newly formed companies. Now, due to the COVID situation, the government has said we grant an extension of 6 months. So within 12 months, the commencement of business certificate can be obtained. Right. Please remember, without the commencement of business certificate, no company can start business operations. So to say, it can be incorporated, but no company can start business operations. As regards the moratorium period is from April 1 to September 30, 2020. 6 months of moratorium period means that if during this period you are filing certain documents with the MCA, with the ROC, and these are due, and you are filing in this period, if there is any late fee that would have otherwise accrued to you because of filing during this period, now with the COVID situation, the government has given a relaxation that any document which is filed between the period April 1 to September 30 with the ROC, whether it was there would have been a late fee or not, the moratorium period will apply. So no late fees if filed during this period, any document with the ROC. That's the relaxation that's been given by the government. Next slide, please. Then the other very important thing is the minimum residency clause for resident directors, which is a must for every company. Now that threshold was 182 days. And now last year also, when COVID was there and lockdown was there in many countries across the world, so if the resident director was not able to sort of comply with the 182 days rule, then the government also very clearly said that there's a relaxation that that if in the financial year 1920, for the financial year 1920, if the resident director clause of 182 days is not complied with, then there is a relaxation. There is no problem if the 182 days of residency clause is not adhered to. That's a relaxation that's given for the resident directors. Threshold of IBC, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, yes, the threshold has been increased from 1 lakh of rupees to 10 million rupees. That's a very welcome step for MSMEs in this particular sector. That's one of the big moves that's been done by the government back in April 2020. And of course, the companies who had their financial years ending on December 2019, they can hold the AGM up to September 30. Originally, the due date is June 30, 2020, but because of the COVID situation, they can now hold the AGM till September 30, 2020. For only those companies, please remember, who have their year ended December 31, 2019, right? Next slide, please. Quickly coming to labor compliances, the EPF compliances. Yes, the government reduced the rate of deposit or contribution to the provident fund to 10% from 12%. These were actually for the 3 months. So 3 months means the wage months. Please remember, this is the wage month and not the month. So wage month of May, June, and July, they reduced the rate from 12 to 10. Again, measure COVID measure relaxation, that less amount goes to the contribution and the employees can have more in their pockets. So that is a COVID measure definitely from the Ministry of Labor. And please note that this contribution of 10% is not a mandatory contribution. Employer and employer or any one of them can decide to have additional 2%. So that is not this is not a mandatory option. You can have it as 12% as before. So that's the thing. And the rate applicable for the pension contribution that the employer does, which is 8.33% on the wages, that still stays. So that contribution. So if an employer is contributing 10% of the basic wages to the provident fund as employer contribution. 8.33%, which was earlier there as contribution to pension fund, still remains the contribution to the pension fund, and the contribution to the PF then from the employer side becomes 1.67%. Earlier it was 3.67%. So that's one change, and these rates, reduced rates, are applicable to the wage months irrespective of the date of their payment, the payment of the salary for the 3 months. Effect on employee taxability, of course, if an employer decides to contribute more, if an employee decides to contribute more, so the effects on the taxability has to be seen, because this is a statutory reduction that has happened from 12 to 10 if the employer contributes more for the employee. So whether that will be taxable or not is as a perquisite is a matter that needs to be should be examined. Next slide, please. RBI compliances, and this probably is my last slide. In fact, once again, a COVID relaxation. In case of exports, you know that there's a timeline for realization and repatriation of the proceeds from abroad. So earlier the timeline was 9 months. Now it has been increased to 15 months through RBI circular. This has increased to 15 months for all exports made up to July 31, 2020. Right? This is very important. And no need for any letters to the RBI or to the AD banker for any extension. This has been statutorily given as a relaxation, and therefore it is now 15 months for any export up to July 31, 2020. As regards the imports, we all know that for imports the date by which you need to make the payment is 6 months, right, from the date of shipment. Now this has been enhanced to 12 months, so an extension by another 6 months. This again is a statutory relaxation, so the importers will be very happy with this. So these are the RBI compliances, and of course, last but not the least, the statement that is to be filed with the Reserve Bank of India by every company with regard to foreign assets and foreign liabilities and assets, called the FLA return. That date has been extended from earlier June 15th to July 15th to July 31st. That extension has happened, and again a statutory relaxation on this count. So with this, I think I have covered everything on the corporate law and other allied laws, as well as CARO 2020, the main point of discussion which we wanted to present before you. Now the floor is open for questions.
Thank you, Subroto, for such a wonderful presentation. So now we'll move on to the question answer, which we have already received from some of the participants. So the first question is deferment of GSTR 2A reconciliation till September 2020. What will be the impact for entity who claims refund, and how the same has to be dealt in financial statement by auditor? So I'll request Sandeep to please answer this question.
Yeah, okay, very interesting question, I must say. But see, the relaxation of not requiring to reconcile GSTR 2A with your ITC ledger for the period February to August is only for the purposes of your tax liability discharge during these months. The government has also said that you will need to do that RECO from February to August and make sure your liability is adjusted up or down in the filing of September month return. It has nothing to do with your refund process. The refund process is dealt by the notification and the rules and the provisions of the Act, which as they stand now, if anything is not appearing in your GSTR 2A, you cannot claim a refund. So be very careful of this aspect.
Thank you. So the next question is again on the ITT front. Zero rated supplies, how to read for export oriented company if the total local sales is only 2% and rest is fully export. Also similar goods, meaning, can you please elaborate?
See, zero rated supplies in the case of EOUs, the percentage wise, it doesn't matter. So if your DTA sales are 2% and your export sales are 98%, on a broad mathematical model, you will be entitled to a refund of 98% of your tax credit. That's the way it works. But the point I was making, which is probably the part 2 of your question. How do you define similar? Not defined in the change which has been made in the statute. What they say, probably I can illustrate it more by way of an example, that if you are selling a machinery in India which is worth 1 crore of rupees, and if you are also exporting the same machinery to a customer in USA where you are charging 2 crore rupees, then your turnover, for the purposes of determining refund, the export turnover will not be considered as 2 crore, it will be considered as 1.5 crore, which is 1.5 times of your sales in India. This is very easy to determine when you have a apple to apple comparison. The same product is sold in India and the same product is exported. The challenge which I mentioned during my talk also was that if it is not being sold in India at all, which means I am only an export oriented unit 100%, right? And my product is unique to a very large degree. It has no parallel to any product being sold in India. Then how will the authorities, GST authorities, determine that what domestic product is very similar to your product and what is going to be the domestic rate of the value of it, and how will 1x time be calculated on what number? That is exactly the challenge I was trying to point out here. Very easy, if you are selling the same product apple to apple in India and abroad, will not affect you. Of course, the value wise you may lose a lot of refund. So that is the challenge which we need to work out with the GST authority, justify them that this product in India is of a similar nature. And if I may be adventurous enough to say that probably we can draw a comparison based on transfer pricing regulation and norms, which are also accepted by taxation authorities. So there also, when we are talking of an arm's length concept between related parties in terms of exports, there a similar concept in terms of similar goods or services is also determined to determine the value. So probably that could be one of the ways by which you can demonstrate before the tax officer that this is the correct value, and an apple to apple comparison, though not possible, a similar value could be derived like this. That would be my suggestion to you on this aspect.
Thank you, Sandeep, for such a great explanation. So the next question is, need one clarification on EPF contribution of 10%. How to bifurcate the new rate to pension fund and PF account? I mean, what ratio of 10% will go to pension fund and what ratio will go to PF account?
See, absolutely, extremely good question. The FAQ to of the PF department clearly clarifies this. And again, the circular that came out on 18th of May, if I'm not wrong, it very clearly says that the contribution to the pension fund will be 8.33% of the wages. That's standard. That will not be reduced. The contribution of the employer to the PF kitty is earlier, if it is 10% in total, it will now be 1.67% from the earlier 3.67%. So the 8.33% contribution to the pension fund remains as it is, even when the total contribution is 10%.
Okay. So the next question is, can you please elaborate a bit about inventory valuation, particularly for this year?
Yeah. So
I mean, how do we do the inventory valuation?
Yeah, very interesting question. Inventory, as you all know, I now go into the accounting standard on inventory. So as you all know, that inventory is valued at cost or net realizable value, whichever is lower. As an accountant, when you prepare the financial statements and value the inventory, you have to be very careful in normal circumstances only, that whether your inventory has gone down below cost. So an auditor, because there are one of the ways of calculating inventory, and of course you have to calculate both ways. The cost is already there with you and the net realizable value. Now in the COVID scenario, the inventories are lying in stock. They are not being used. They're not being moved. It's very slow moving or not moving at all. Now, whether the realizable value of these inventories have gone down, realizable value means compared akin to the market value, the sale value. So if that has gone down below the cost, So therefore, your valuation of inventory will now become NRV, which is net realizable value, or cost, whichever is lower as per the standard. Therefore, it will now be as per NRV. Especially in the COVID scenario, this testing has to be done for each and every line item of the inventory. And mind you, in the Caro report, which the auditor prepares, and of course, they will ask a lot of information from you. And as I in the presentation also, the 4 major key things in the Caro report. Each item of inventory in property, plant, and equipment, any deviation of more than 10%, you have to give reasons. So the auditor, in fact, will ask from you as to what is the reason for deviation of more than 10%. So all those things were not there earlier. So therefore, this assumes, as I said, this is the answer. This is very important to value the inventory in such a scenario.
Yeah. So the next question is, the paperless custom clearance, does it mean that importers are able to get their consignment with the soft copy of bill of lading, and it does not create an issue for importers bank when handling letter of credit?
See, there are 2 aspects involved here, if I may mention it. The bankers are a separate entity and the customs authorities are a separate entity. On a practical plane, what the customs authority have done is that they have given the importers the relaxation and the leeway that because of the difficulties in generating paperwork and because of the difficulties of movement during the COVID times, you can get your stuff, your imports cleared in a paperless way by submitting the PDF copies. So those copies are submitted. The authorizations by the custom officers at the point of entry, they also move their permissions electronically from one computer to the other, from one desk to the other. And on that basis, your imports are cleared from the customs station. Now, from a purpose of the bankers, what they will require will be determined by their own internal compliance department and their own internal compliances. What I could tell you is that the bankers will certainly insist on the original copies to be submitted to them for various compliance requirements from the RBI's angle, but that will need to be submitted when the bank wants. At the time of opening an LC, yes, they will want the original documents to be certified and verified and attested by you, and those will still have to be submitted. So it will have to be a very close negotiation and interaction with the bankers to deal with the flow of paperwork, and especially now, because now the market has opened up, now the movement has opened up, barring of course some states and certain cities, the things are moving. So paperless would not be a position vis-a-vis the bankers, but the paperless continues to be a position vis-a-vis the custom authorities. If I have been able to answer that question, otherwise please you could also email us and we can respond to you in greater detail post this webinar.
Yeah. So what is the effective date of additional information in Form 26AS?
I think that's June, 1st of June 2020 is when they will start populating it. So now, as you know, the CBIC and CBDT have signed an MOU that they will be sharing information. Their computers will be talking to each other. Similarly, CBDT is also collating a lot of information from various other state and central government authorities, like the land records, the properties, the registrars, and things like those. So all information from 1st of June onwards, probably the transaction from 1st of June onwards, would start getting populated into your 26AS on a, I think that the delay is a quarter. So at the end of the quarter, you would be seeing that information visible on your 26AS.
Sure. So considering the paucity of time, so I'll take the last question. How do we justify the going concern to the auditors? Any suggestion? So I'll request Subrata to please answer this.
Very important one, Subrata.
Yeah, once again, extremely important, and the question, the person who's asking this question has cracked at the right point. When the so the fact of the matter is, yes, the going concern question has to be addressed very, very carefully. It any which ways is to be addressed at any point in time. Now with the COVID situation, the auditor would definitely want to ask and question on the applicability of the going concern concept. Even in the Caro report, as I mentioned, the auditors have to specifically mention and comment on the fact that whether on the studying the financial ratios, the financial statement, talking to the management, seeing the order book, everything the auditor at their disposal will be using to come to a conclusion as to whether the company is able to meet its liabilities or realize its assets 1 year within the date of the balance sheet. So your paperwork has to be extremely solid. If you are facing a difficult time, the support letter from the parent company, the order book that you have, which you can prove to the auditor that yes, I have a good amount of orders in the later part of the year which I have to fulfill. So the going concern concept is very much kicking in alive. Your financial ratios you need to study beforehand, before the auditor steps in. You need to see how and where and in which aspect in your financial statement you can generate those documents, those valid evidences which can satisfy the auditors. Of course, as I said, the 4 points that I mentioned in this going concern testing, these are the key pointers. So if you can satisfy on those points, I think the job should be done.
Yeah, thank you. So considering the shortage of time, the questions which are unanswered, we'll address them on one-to-one basis. So I'll request Rajiv to please thank the speaker and close the webinar. Over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for a wonderful explanation. As I said, the objective of our webinars is largely to address the pain points, and as I listen to the entire discussion, I think one thing is for sure that both the gentlemen on the call or on the webinar today tried to talk of a lot of pragmatic issues that we as the business community, as accountants, as professionals are facing because of this unusual situation that we are in. But having said that, we are more than happy to get suggestions from the people who are today participating in this webinar as to some points that you like us to talk about, to discuss, because as I said, it's as much a learning for us as it is for you, and therefore together we can definitely learn a lot more. So please do contribute in terms of writing into us as to the areas that you would like us to be talking about more, or your pain points. Am I repeating that point again? But yeah, so we can specifically discuss those pain points of yours. Last but not the least, before we say goodbye, a little bit about our firm. Some of you may already know about us, but for people who are not aware of our firm, I'll quickly say that we are a 3-decade-old firm with 8 offices in India, and a network of like-minded professionals who we work with across the globe, and with over 650 people or 700 people who are working with us. It's a delight to be a part of this lovely organization. I repeat by saying thank you to all for being part of this webinar this afternoon, and would be very happy to get in your suggestions to see how we can improve it. Thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful day ahead and a wonderful week that is to follow. Bye-bye.